What do you guys say? We get started?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Let's do it. Okay. Welcome to be a Mensch, including breakfast at your own table. I don't have breakfast this morning, but hopefully you guys all have breakfast.
I'm having
coffee. Today we are doing Ethics of Our Fathers, Pirkei, Avot, Pirkei, the second chapter, Mishnah, the 8th Mishnah. And I am super excited for today's lesson. Why? Because for a while now, we have been studying moral ideas and ethical ideas from different sages. And we've kind of been doing a couple from the same people, and this has turned much more into an ethical conversation, while I always like it to be a balance of a historical and an ethical conversation. So today, we have a little more history. For those of you that have been with us for many of the lessons prior, you know that the way that Pirkei Avot is structured is that from the beginning of Pirkei Avot, at least until the end of chapter 2, the way it works is as follows. We are introduced to the sages of that time, in other words, the leaders of the Jewish generation at that time. We are told who they were, who received, in other words, the oral tradition, beginning with Moses to Joshua, to the elders, etc. And then we hear a piece of wisdom, ethical advice, moral instruction from them as to how we should go about our lives, right? This has been the case up until now, and if you were following with us, you'll notice that up until today, the Jewish people were led, in other words, up until Mishnah, Pirkei, which is what our lesson opens with today, the Jewish people were always led by two, right? From the end of the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, from the end of the Men of the Great Assembly, if you have this book, you should definitely grab this book together with you. I know Steve and Ron, you have it. Yes, Ali, same book. We're on page 62. Up until this era, the Jewish people were led by what was known as the Zugot. Okay, the Zugot are the peers. The peers means that there were two rabbis that led the Jewish people, not as a rule, but generally speaking, they were the Nasi, the prince of the Jewish people. In other words, the leader for politically and the judge of the Jewish people, etc. And then there was the Av Bet Din, who was more of the Torah leader of the generation, who had more, not that the other one didn't know Torah, but these were kind of their two roles, the political and the Torah role, and how they led the Jewish people. And they led the people throughout that generation. Peers, two for each generation. The last generation that we just finished learning 3 or 4 weeks of Hillel's advice. Hillel famously led the Jewish people together with Shammai, Hillel and Shammai, and now we get to the first generation past the Zukkah. From now on, the Jewish people are led by one rabbi alone. In this instance, it's Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is probably one of the most famous Jewish sages from the Talmudic era, from the Mishnaic era, to lead the Jewish people. Many of you might not recognize his name, but as soon as I start saying some stories about him, you will immediately recognize him. He goes up there together with Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, Rabbi Akiva, the big ones that you hear about all the time. Not some of the, you may not have heard of Rab Zera, you may not have heard of Abaya or Rava, but you've definitely heard of these ones. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the youngest student of Hillel. And even though he was the youngest student, he was known as being one of the wisest. In fact, there's this little anecdotal story which I'll share with you which shows this point. Hillel was once teaching Torah. I'm sorry, he was not teaching Torah. Hillel was once ill, and all of his students came to visit him. I'm going to assume he was also teaching Torah at that time, but it wasn't like the regular Torah teaching. He was ill, so all the students came to visit. And as you can imagine, there wasn't enough space for everybody, right? So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was there to get together with everybody else. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai kind of realized, he's one of the youngest, so he should stay outside and make space for everybody else to go in. And as they were surrounding Hillel, he said to them, "Where is the smallest," and I quote, "Where is the smallest among you who is a father of wisdom and a father of the generations?" And this was a little bit prophetic because at that time, Hillel was the first person to call him by this name. But later on, we find in the Gemara that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was called commonly the father of the generations. And the reason he was called that is because, as you'll see, he led the Jewish people through probably till today the most turbulent time in Jewish history, namely the destruction of the Second Temple, kind of the time preceding it, the actual destruction, and seeing them through that into post-destruction of the Temple era. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai led the Jewish people firmly through this time. He set up some things that till today, legislation that we have in place till today, some amazing things which guide us through exile, as we'll see in a moment. And as a result, he was called the father of the generations. To the best of my knowledge, I believe that when he was at the bedside of Hillel, then this was before these times and these things happened, and so this was a little bit prophetic. In any event, so let's go through the story of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's life a little bit. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai started his kind of rabbinic career in a city called Arev, which is up in the Galilee. For those of you that are familiar with the layout of Israel, right? This is up in the north, in the mountains. And for the most part, the people in that area were mainly ignoramuses. They didn't know that much Torah. So Rabbi Yochanan was able to devote his time to studying Torah on his own. I believe, well, I didn't see this as I was preparing my class for today, but I believe I have this in my head from prior classes and prior pieces of history that I have in my head. I believe that before this, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai actually started off his career as a young person as a businessman. And it was him and, I think this was just recently we read this. Him and another sage. I'm looking to see if we read this last week. I think it was him and another sage that they were standing like at the edge of at the foot of a mountain or at the foot of a cliff or something, and a mountain came down and almost killed them. And it was kind of a breakthrough moment when they realized that if they continue their lives just through business and they're not studying Torah, then they're not connected to Hashem at as deep a level as they can. And that's when Rabbi Yochanan decided to lead his life learning Torah. In any event, without trying to say every story that happened in Rabbi Yochanan's life, during that time when he was a rabbi in the Galilee, they say that in 18 years there was only twice that people came to consult with him. Can you imagine being such a rabbi? I'm a rabbi, and in this class alone, I've already had 2 people come to consult with me. One wants to know what time is the minyan, and the other one. Right? In any event, he was a rabbi for 18 years, so you can imagine he was studying Torah, and he was firmly entrenched in that. But then he went on to become a rabbi in Jerusalem, and over there, he spent a lot of time consulting. It was during that time that, during the holidays, of course, right, when all of the students would come to hear from their teachers, it says that Rabbi Yochanan would teach the temple or the study hall, whatever it was, in the place. Meaning it was right outside of the second temple, right outside of the Beit HaMikdash. And in that area where he would teach, there wasn't enough space to fit everybody, and he would teach the entire day. This is what the Gemara tells us in Tractate Pesachim. And he was certainly involved in the Sanhedrin, which was the greatest body of Jewish leadership, the 70 sages that had a special hall in the Beit HaMikdash itself, where they would teach and lead and judge. So he was involved in that as well. Okay. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had a nephew. We'll talk about his nephew in a moment. Okay. Then began the famous Jerusalem siege, right? The siege by the Romans on Jerusalem. This is immediately preceding the destruction of the Second Temple. We know this because we marked this by a fast, the 10th of Tevet, when the Romans surrounded the walls of the city of Jerusalem. They laid siege to the city of Jerusalem. The siege to the city of Jerusalem actually would not have been so terrible, would not have been so detrimental to the Jewish people if it were not for the political division and discord that there was among the Jewish people themselves. Many of you might be familiar with this. The Jewish people had, I think it was three great, like tremendously wealthy people that said that they would support the Jewish people. I mentioned this in previous courses, in previous lessons, and there are details to this. I don't remember the exact details. One of them said he has enough wood for them. Another one said he has enough meat for them, or I forgot exactly. But basically, they had enough to support the Jewish people of that time through the siege for a tremendous amount of years. And they had storage houses, and that was the plan. And the problem was that there were others among the Jewish people who believed that this was the wrong approach. They wanted to fight the Romans. They believed that we're Jews, we have to stand up for our rights, like the Meir Kahana kind of people. Every Jew at 22, these kind of people. And they believed so strongly, and they saw that they were losing the battle, at least the political battle, with the approach that the Jewish people were going to take. So they chose to set fire to those storage houses in order to force the Jewish people to either fight or give in to the Romans, and their assumption was that then the Jewish people would win, or at least they would fight. I mean, I don't understand the full thought process, but that was kind of their tactic. These were called the Biryonim, okay, and they were led by a man whose name was Abba Sikra. Abba Sikra was the nephew of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, believe it or not. And actually, at one point during all the madness, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai called him in for a private meeting, and he said to him, "Till when are you going to, string the Jewish people along like this? We have to kind of get this under control." And Abba Sikra said, "What can I do?" As with all zealots, just because they have a leader, that doesn't mean that that leader controls them and they listen to what he says. The moment that he won't be as extreme as they would like him to be, they'll just move along and do whatever they want, right? That's the way extreme people are. So he said, if I tell them, let's back down, let's negotiate with the Romans, let's whatever it was that Yochanan ben Zakkai wanted to do, they would never listen to me. And he was correct. And according to most historical sources and in the Gemara, historical sources in the Gemara, even though obviously the Gemara is not a history book, but according to most opinions, this was the downfall of the Jewish people, particularly because they couldn't get their act together in terms of being together as a people, in any event. Without kind of going through the entire history of the destruction of the temple, because it's not the 3 weeks, and it's not the 9 days, and it's not Tisha B'Av now. We're just learning about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So let's focus on his role here. So when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai realized that this whole thing is going to go down in flames, in other words, the Romans are going to destroy the entire city, and the Jewish people are going to go into exile, when he started to realize what's going to be happening here, so he wanted to have one time to talk to General Vespasian. General Vespasian was the general who was laying siege to Jerusalem, and he said, I'd like to have one time to talk to him. So they arranged this plan. They put something smelly, I forgot what it was, whatever it was, rotten onions or whatever it was, in order that the house of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai should start to smell. And his closest students were in on the ruse, and they said that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was feeling very, very ill, and that he was about to pass. And they said, and then they pretended like he passed away, and they put him in a coffin, and it was only his closest students that held him. By the way, these closest students are the ones we're going to learn about, for those who didn't have the book, on page 64, where it says Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had 5 special students. The next Mishnah, Mishnah Tet, talks about the 5 students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and those are the ones we're going to start to hear about from next week and on. In other words, we're going to go through them one at a time, and each one of them is going to teach us a lesson, etc. So these students carried him out, and I think it was a little bit of a miracle as they were passing the Roman sentries at the door, at the gates of Jerusalem. They wanted to, first of all, they were the ones carrying him to make sure that nobody knew that he was so heavy, right? Because that he was so light. The dead are much heavier than the living. And then they brought him out, and they wanted to pierce spears through, or something. Maybe they did pierce spears through. I forgot exactly what happened there. There was a story there. Eventually, they brought him, once they were outside the walls of Jerusalem, they brought him to the emperor, he was not emperor yet, to the general Vespasian. They brought him to the general Vespasian, and he comes out, and he talks to the general. The general says, "Oh, I haven't been arrested." And he says, "Your Honor, Your Honor, the emperor, please do not have me arrested," or whatever it was. And he says to him, "I'll have you arrested for treason. I'm not the emperor. The emperor is in Rome." And he says to him, and he doesn't say anything. And at that moment, a messenger came from the emperor in Rome, and said that the emperor died, and Vespasian became the emperor. In other words, he became Emperor Vespasian. There's a little bit of a story where he was in the middle of putting on his shoes at that time. Vespasian was in the middle of putting his boots on. And when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was in the middle of talking to him, he had one boot on, and the other boot wasn't on yet. And after he heard the news, he couldn't get the boot on. And he was turning around to everybody like, what's wrong? How come? I don't understand. It fit me just a second ago. How come I can't get this boot on? And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, the reason you can't, do I have permission to speak? And he gave him permission to speak. And he said, the reason you cannot get your boot on is because it says in Tehillim, Shmua Tova Tadash Natzim, which means good news makes a person fat. Believe it or not. When you hear good news, you swell with pride. You know that feeling? That feeling that we say, oh, and people always talk about, like, your heart swells with pride. It's actually your whole body swells a little bit when you hear amazing news. So because you heard this news about you becoming the emperor, so your foot swelled. So and he couldn't get the other one off. He couldn't get the boot that was on off, and he couldn't put the other one on. So he said, okay, so what should I do? So he said, bring someone that you dislike in front of you. That's what they did. And immediately he shrunk back and he was able to get the boot off or get the boot on, whatever it was that he wanted. So he realized Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was a great sage. He said to him, what do you want from me? Right? Because first of all, he just predicted that he's going to become the emperor. In addition to that, he helped him through this situation. So he said to him, what do you want from me? So he said, I want 3 things. I want you to grant me 3 things. And he said, okay, I'm listening. Let's see if I remember all 3. First of all, the Gemara talks about this. The Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was so wise that he recognized tafasta meruba lo tafasta, as the Gemara often says. That if you try to grab too much, you will get nothing. If you try to get everything, like if he would have asked for the entire siege to end and then he should let the temple stand, etc., he realized he wasn't going to get that. So he started to prepare, like we said earlier, for the exile. So he asked for a couple of things. Number 1 he asked for was that Rabbi Tzadok should get proper medical assistance. Rabbi Tzadok was one of the greatest rabbis at the time, or whatever. He was a great Jewish sage. I don't know if he was one of the greatest, but he was a great Jewish sage, and he was one of the sickest people at the time. I think they say, is anybody eating breakfast? I can't see everybody's cameras. I don't know if anybody's eating now. I don't want to gross anybody out. But I believe they say that when he would eat, you were able to see the food go pass through his body. That's how thin he was. Literally, I get, whenever I think about it, I kind of imagine those grotesque images we see of the Holocaust, of Jews in the Holocaust, like as they were coming out, like something like that. Like apparently he was like disastrously ill, and so he wanted proper medical help for him. He asked for one other thing, I forget what it was, and the third and most famous request that he made of Vespasian was, Tenli Yavne v'chachameha. Give me Yavne and her wise sages. It was at that time that that the Sanhedrin was going to move out of the second temple, because the second temple was destroyed, and he wanted that there should be a seat of learning Torah, a seat of Torah learning for the Jewish people.
The descendants of Rabbi Gamaliel, that was the other thing that he asked for.
Come again, what was the third thing?
The descendants of Rabbi Gamaliel, that they should survive the...
To protect the right, because that was a great rabbinic lineage at the time. It was Hillel was a descendant of, if you remember, we learned this earlier in prior classes, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Gamliel, right, where they went one to the other. That family was considered a great rabbinic family, so he wanted that family to be protected. Okay, but his most famous request was, Tenli Yavne v'chachameha. Give me Yavne and her wise sages. At that time, the Sanhedrin was going to move to the city of Yavne, and he wanted that there should be a seat of Torah learning. He recognized that if there is no city where a person can go, can send their children, can send their young teenage boys, that they should go to yeshiva, they should be able to learn, the Torah itself will be forgotten. Those of you that are attending now, the JLI course that we're giving on Thursdays, right, the Judaism Decoded one, where we talk about how the Torah went down generation to generation, you know that one of the most crucial things to how we know that the Torah is true till today, particularly the oral Torah, has a lot to do with the way that the Torah was transmitted through bodies and academies of people learning Torah together. This was extremely important. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai requested that. Okay, I was going to tell a little bit also about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai later on and how he passed away, etc. But you know what? Enough about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai for now. Let's learn about what he teaches us. Give me a thumbs up if you can see the Mishnah up on the screen. Hold on. I can't even see you guys. Hold on. Give me a thumbs up again. Yeah. All right. Perfect. All right. So let me zoom in here a little bit. And Arnold, you want to get us started? Please read the Mishnah itself for us. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai teaches us, right? So of course he received from Hillel. We can't hear you, Arnold. You have to unmute yourself.
Sorry for that.
Now we hear you. Go ahead.
All right. So right at the top?
Yep.
Okay. Rabbi Yehuda ben Zakkai receives and learned Torah from Hillel and Shammai. He would often say, if you have learned a lot of Torah, do not take credit for yourself, because this is what you were created for.
Thank you, Arnold. Let's see if the story, it's got to be here. The story here about, yeah, here we go. Okay. We're gonna skip for a moment, and I'll share the next page with you to the biography, because this is the reason I want to share about how he passed away, because this directly ties in. For those of you that are regular attendees to this class, you know that we try to often connect what they teach us with who they were. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai tells us, remember, this is one of the greatest Jewish leaders of all time, certainly one of the greatest Torah scholars of all time. Mm-hmm. His name is mentioned in the Mishnah countless times. He teaches us so much Torah. He had thousands and thousands of students, and he really helped with the preservation of Torah. And he is telling us, if you learned a lot of Torah, don't take your own credit. One of the humblest people of all time, learning from Moshe Rabbeinu. Don't take the credit for yourself because this is what you were created for. You're just doing your job. That's it, right? So before we get into what he actually teaches us and how this can be applicable in our lives, let's see how much he actually lived by what he said. Okay, so let me just switch the share for a moment to page 2. Okay, and this is the biographical section. Obviously, I gave you a lot more of this biography, but if I can ask Steve, you want to read for us here? I know you also have the book, so maybe you won't need to see the words properly. Whenever you're ready, Steve.
I'm ready.
Biography, go ahead.
Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai lived through the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash. As leader of Bnei Yisrael in that difficult time, he instituted many decrees to preserve the Torah way of life. He was the youngest student of Hillel, but considered one of the greatest. He served as Av Beit Din and, like his teacher Hillel, lived for 120 years. Wow. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was always the first to arrive at the Beit Midrash and the last to leave. He was knowledgeable in every area of the Torah, Tanakh, Mishnah, and commentary of the Mishnah, Halakha, Agada, and
tiny details,
subtle points learned from the words of the Torah, astronomical cycles, and more. He was even familiar with the language of the Malachim,
which is the angels.
Right. Nevertheless, he said, if the entire sky were parchment and all the trees were quills, the oceans filled with ink, it would have to be impossible to write all that I have learned from my teachers. Yet I have learned is only but a drop in the vast ocean of their knowledge. He was always the first to greet everyone, Jew and non-Jew alike.
All right, hold on. So now we get a little bit of a glimpse, right? This, in addition to everything I've told you already about him, but as to how great of a Torah scholar he was. And now look at these powerful words that he says on his deathbed. Go ahead.
While on his deathbed, he told his students, I see two paths before me, one leading to Gan Eden and the other to Gehenim. I don't know down which path I will be taken. He was busy learning, teaching, and helping the community that he did not have a spare minute to evaluate his personal service to Hashem.
Look at the humility. Look at the devotion to Torah. He was so busy learning that he never had time to actually assess where he was holding in terms of he never focused on the reward or punishment of the matter. For those of you that are not familiar, Gan Eden refers to the world to come. In other words, spiritual reward that is given for Torah learning and doing mitzvahs. And Gehenna is the opposite. That's where the soul goes after 120, if we ever did any negative actions in our lives, to cleanse itself before it goes into Gan Eden. And he says, I'm 120 years old, about to pass away, and I'm not sure which direction you're going to take me. Seriously? You're not sure? I'm sure, and I lived thousands of years after him, and I only heard a little bit about him, and I could be sure which direction he was going, right? But he was so devoted to Torah learning, and so devoted to Torah learning for the sake of Torah learning. In other words, not for the sake of the reward or for the sake of the or to avoid the punishment. He was devoted to actually learning because that was your job. He was created to study Torah, and that's what he did, right? And that's such a powerful approach. Not that necessarily that's the way we have to live, that, when we come to our death, we have no idea where we're going, but at least we should strive that as often as possible, we should do things because they're the right thing. Not because, I want to get into Gan Eden, I want to get some reward. It's not a brownie points kind of situation. There's no points tally. It's not a score-keeping goal, right? Let's see what the Chafetz Chaim said. Baron, you want to read for us the story on the side over here?
Just fulfilling an obligation. The Chafetz Chaim was once overheard saying that the following: Dear Father in heaven, what have you done for me? And what have I done for you? You decided that the world needs the Mishnah, Baruch, Shamaras, Hashloshim, Tisfish, etc.
These are the Chafetz Chaim's works. They're called the Mishnah Brura. By the way, these are some of the most famous books till today. Many of you probably heard about the Mishnah Brura, which is like a condensation, like a concise work of halacha. If somebody doesn't want to read or doesn't have time for the layman to read the entire Shulchan Aruch, the entire Jewish Code of Law, they can read just the Mishnah Brura, which is kind of a conciser version of it. The Shmiras HaLashon, some of you might be familiar with this movement, guarding your tongue against speaking evil, not gossiping, not saying Lashon Hara against other people, all started by the Chafetz Chaim, who has a full book of this topic, Tzipis of Yeshua, and many other books that he wrote. Okay, go ahead.
You gave me the great merit of fulfilling your wishes, and I have no words to thank you for that. But what have I done for you? Nothing. Please, dear Father, give me an opportunity to do something for you.
So look at this again, a great Jewish sage, right? Much more recent, by the way. I think they actually just found, I don't remember exactly when he lived. I think it was in the 1900s. But they just found, no, it must be later than that, 1920s maybe. They just found video footage of him for the first time, like 3-4 years ago. Like this black and white footage when he came to America, I think. I don't remember exactly when he lived. I'm sure it says it somewhere in this book, maybe not. In any event, he wrote all these books, and he's famous still today, and he had such an impact on the course of Jewish history, etc. What's his response? He says, Hashem has given me the opportunity to be the person to bring this about to the world. But what have I done for Hashem? Hashem did so much for me by allowing me to do this, but I haven't given anything up for Hashem, right? In other words, he's looking for opportunities where he could give up of himself. Again, this point of not doing things for reward, but rather doing things for recognizing that this is our job and this is what we need to do. So Ali, you want to read for us a little bit of the living lessons? Just doing my job. Let me just unmute. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Just doing my job. Perhaps you have a very strong memory and understand your lessons more quickly than your friends. Maybe you can sing beautifully, or perhaps you are very sensitive and know just the right thing to say in order to cheer someone up. Whatever your talents are, remember that they are gifts from Hashem, and that using them to serve Him is not just a nice thing. In fact, it is for that purpose that Hashem gave them to you at all.
Thank you, Ali. You know, I was once watching a TED Talk of a fellow, those of you that know me know that I like the social sciences, behavioral sciences a lot. And there's a TED Talk given by a guy, I can't remember if it was Daniel Kahneman or Dan Ariely, one of my favorite authors. I forgot exactly who, one of the fellows involved in this kind of field. And he was talking about one of his many studies, one of his many experiments that he did. And he said he set up a Monopoly board and in a room, and he would have his testees or whatever it was, the test subjects come in and just play Monopoly, right? Raise your hand, everybody knows what Monopoly is, right? Everybody's been a kid before? Arnold, you ever played Monopoly before, official? Nachman, everybody played Monopoly? All right. So, no. You never played Monopoly. Because Monopoly is a game where you have to buy as much property as you can on the board in order to, and earn money in order to buy more property and collect rent, etc. I guess originally it was kind of meant to give kids the idea of business and property management, etc. In any event, so here the test was that they would start off the game with an unequal amount of money, right? So the way you're supposed to play the game is that everybody starts off with the same amount of money, and then you play the game and you move on. And so they would start off the game, I guess, with one person having triple the amount of money as the other people, all right? For those of you that have ever played Monopoly know, if you start off with triple the amount of money as everybody else, you literally have to be a fool in order not to win the game, okay? Now, here's the deal, though. Everybody in the game knew that one person started off with more, right? And what he was monitoring were certain kind of pieces of behavior to see what they would exhibit. And he noticed that even though everybody knew that this game was rigged and that obviously one person is going to win, he noticed that within a few moments, certain behaviors, whether that was body language or whether that was actual words that they would say, would start to be exhibited by the person who was winning. They would start to be pompous. They would start to feel good about themselves, that they were the ones that were winning, and they would kind of make fun of other people, even if it was done subtly, even if they were kind people. There's something about being successful that gets to our heads, no matter what it is, and no matter whether it can actually be attributed to our own efforts or not. When we are successful, we like to kind of attribute it to ourselves. It must be about what I did. Our bodies become more, we hold ourselves higher, and we talk down to other people, and we feel more good about ourselves, etc. While this is obviously 100% not true in this case. His point was, I guess, to show that sometimes we got to work on our humility, we got to keep ourselves in check. The reason I share this with you today is because that's precisely the lesson that Ali just read for us, that we're trying to learn from this Mishnah, which is when you have a certain greatness in your life that's clearly not attributed to you. You might have been born good looking, literally, right? There are studies out there that people that are better looking than other people will be more successful in life. I recently watched a video by a famous YouTuber whose name is Mark Rober. I don't know if anybody ever watched him. He has an old YouTube video that not recently popped in my feed, and when I was trying to just clear some time, it popped up. And he, I guess at one point had a unibrow, like a real unibrow, and he when he learned how to shave, he says in the 6th grade, whatever it was, he started shaving, right here like that. He doesn't have a unibrow. And he did a little study, just not a real study, just like a YouTube video, whatever, where he goes around, and when he has a unibrow, he notices the people will talk to him for less often. They look at him more as a creep, etc. You know what I mean? Like a real unibrow, not like I have, like a legit one where it's dark in the middle. He looks like a creep. And people don't talk to him for as often, and they kind of shy away from him, etc. And when he did it, people were more likely to talk to him for longer and to definitely assist him. He would go into grocery stores and just ask people, where is this, where is that? And people were more likely to assist him. There are so many things which are not even our own talents that cannot be attributed to us, which we, by just our very nature, we choose to take credit for them. Whether it's our good looks, whether it's because we're naturally more sensitive to other people, whether it's we're naturally more patient people, whether it's naturally we are more academically inclined people, we're brighter than other people. There are lots of talents that we should recognize that Hashem gave to us, right? Like Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, if you learned a lot of Torah, don't attribute it to yourself, attribute it to Hashem. Remind yourself that the efforts that you put in are like a drop in the ocean compared to what Hashem has given you, the talents that Hashem has given you, and that's why you're being successful. That's why you've learned so much Torah. That's why you're a more sensitive person. That's why you're so rich. That's whatever it is that you struggle with in your life. So we should apply what Rabbi Yochanan is saying, not just to our Torah smarts, but to all talents that we have in our lives. We should recognize that they come from Hashem. Okay, we still got a couple minutes. Let's do a little more. Fishel, you want to read for us a little bit? Did you know? Oh, sorry, 1 second. Don't be selfish. We were right here. Don't be selfish. Go ahead.
I'm going to gift my time to Ali.
All right, why don't we move on to Ron? Ron, living lessons, don't be selfish. You want to read for us?
The Mishnah says that if you have learned much Torah, literally these words mean don't hold the good for yourself. Don't keep your wonderful Torah knowledge to yourself. Share it with others.
Okay, so this comes from the Medrash Shmuel. Those of you that are regular attendees of the class know that the Medrash Shmuel is a Medrash on Pirkei Avot. He has a lot of great insights that we've shared over our time. Come again?
I said, if you'd like, I can read something too.
Thank you. We'll ask you to read right next, Simcha Bracha. Thank you for offering. So the Medrash Shmuel shares with us here. He says, there's a little word play that we can do here. Al tafsik tova latzmach. What did we say? We said, don't keep the credit for yourself. But the word that's being translated as credit is tova, which means good. Don't keep the good for yourself. In other words, share it with others. If you know Torah, share it with others. As the Rebbe would always encourage us, if you know Aleph, even if you don't know Bet yet, if you know a little bit of Torah, even if you don't know all the Torah yet, if you know a little bit, but you don't know the full bit, teach whatever you know to other people, spread the Torah around, spread the goodness around. Now we'll move on to Simcha Bracha. You want to read for us in the green section? Did you know? You have to unmute yourself, Marguerite. Go ahead.
Okay. On the green section, the condition?
Yes. Yes.
Did you know? The condition when Hashem created the world, he did so conditionally. If Bnei Israel would accept the Torah, it would continue to exist. If not, it would all return to nothingness. The purpose of the creation of the world was only that Bnei Israel would fulfill the Torah.
So again, thank you very much, Marguerite. So again, continuing along these same lines with the same thread here, that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had to lead the Jewish people through this turbulent time. And his main choice was to keep Yavne v'Chachameh, to keep Torah alive. And even when he teaches us in the Mishnah, what does he teach us? Make sure you study Torah. And when you study Torah, make sure you do so for Hashem and not for anything else. And here they're quoting from the Gemara in Masechta Shabbos, and they're saying the reason why Torah study is so important is because that's the whole purpose of creation. Before Hashem created the Torah, the world, the Torah pre-existed the world, even though it was only revealed to the world in the year 2448 when the Torah was given at Mount Sinai. But the Torah pre-existed the world, and it was actually the condition by which the world was created. Hashem said, if the Jewish people will not keep the Torah, then I will return the world back to nothingness. So we have some very powerful lessons that we can walk away with today. We're out of time, so we're going to end here. We try to keep it to about a half an hour lesson. And thank you all for joining us. I hope you've all had some sort of powerful thought that you can walk away with from today. It'll be a lesson in your life, or even just in history, some great sages that we can learn from, that we can model our life off of. So thank you all for joining us for To Be a Mensch on this fine morning, and have a wonderful Sunday, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you,
Any
Rabbi.
questions?